The news from Guyana, the region and the world. Compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
The news comes to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories. With the news at this time, I am Deanna Jordan. A very good morning to you. To begin the news, here's a look at the lead stories. Locally, legislation to guarantee Guyanese opportunities to supply goods and services to the oil and gas sector, as well as receive training, was tabled in the National Assembly yesterday. In regional news, the St. Vincent and the Grenadines government has fired a number of teachers who refused to take a COVID vaccine. And for the international news, we'll be bringing to you the latest from the BBC World Service. The details coming up in just a moment.
Don't let the fear of contracting the coronavirus disease deter you from seeking the medical care you need. At Eureka Labs, we ensure the safety of our clients and staff with our rigid sanitization routine. This involves the use of ultraviolet lights to effectively rid the air and all surfaces of viruses and bacteria that may be present throughout the lab daily. The light works to rapidly inactivate microorganisms through a physical process that is invisible to human eye. So the next time you need a checkup, don't hesitate to give us a call on 225-7574 to schedule your appointment.
And now the news in detail. The three candidates for the post of leader of the People's National Congress Reform, PNCR, say they are satisfied with preparations for this Saturday's elections. Chief Elections Officer Vincent Alexander says all preparations are in place for the 3,000 delegates to vote at 13 locations in Guyana and one in the diaspora. He says that persons who are not contesting for any position, as well as representatives of the candidates, will be observing the polls.
In each of the locations, from the office of the Chief Elections Officer, there will be persons who are neither candidates nor involved in the campaign, who will be overseeing and administering the voting process. The candidates also have an entitlement to have observers in each of those locations. So we have those mechanisms in place, the normal best standards, best practices in terms of elections, a voters list which have been verified, officials who will ensure that the voters present themselves not only by name, but by virtue of one or four identification instruments.
Mr. Aubrey Norton says he is satisfied with the arrangements for the PNCR's internal elections scheduled for this Saturday, December 18th.
In my opinion, every election will have some problems, but I don't envisage that there will be problems that will affect the integrity of the elections.
Dr. Richard Van West Charles says the weeks of countrywide campaigning by the candidates will help to guide the PNCR's future. While expressing confidence in the PNCR's Chief Election Officer and team, Dr. Charles says reaching out to members was initially a challenge.
The interaction with members becomes important and critical at all times. During the campaign, obviously, we've had some minor issues in terms of access, but those have been overcome. And therefore, I have all confidence that the result of the elections will be in accordance with the democratic expectations of our Constitution and of, that is, the PNCR's Constitution and the party.
Mr. Joseph Harmon says he is also satisfied with plans for the elections.
My team, my campaign, we're satisfied with the arrangements so far. There may be a few things here and there which we still have to tweak, but by and large I think that the arrangements that have been identified by the Chief Elections Officer they are to our satisfaction.
Aspiring leader of the PNCR, Joseph Harmon. Agriculture Minister Zulfikar Mustafa says that the Guyana Sugar Corporation was forced to spend more of the previously allocated $2.3 billion because of severe floods earlier this year. He returned to the National Assembly on Thursday to seek approval for an additional $2.3 billion, but not before Shadow Agriculture Minister Kamraj Ramjatan asked whether the monies were urgently needed.
Wasn't the wages and salaries for workers something that you could have foreseen since the budget process? When did this urgency arise?
But the Agriculture Minister explains that the devastating floods had forced Gaisuco to spend almost all of the monies that had been originally approved for wages and salaries, pensions, maintenance, fuels, lubricants, essential parts, and union dues.
The 1.62 billion for wages and salaries as a contingent. Did you employ more workers as a result since the budget?
Honorable Minister.
Comrade, Mr. Speaker, this is a replacement of the cash that have been utilized because, as I was saying, there was a number of emergency work during that period, from May on to August, and because of that, you have all the heads would have been exhausted. That is why we find it necessary to put the money back into Gaisuco.
Agriculture Minister Zulfikar Mustafa. Local Government Minister Nigel Darmlal says security has been beefed up at all government buildings in all 10 administrative regions because of political threats by the opposition. In clear reference to the severe damage by fire of the Mabaruma Secondary School earlier this year due to reported arson, he said that many more guards have been hired due to threats by the opposition, a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change.
We have found missing documents. What we have found threats on public installations. So we have to make sure that all our installations in every region, and I'm going to repeat this for every question you ask, in all 10 regions, we have to protect the government installations from the APNU AFC's threats and their activists' threats on the installations of our country.
The Bergdam police station was this year destroyed by fire, and weeks later a building housing the headquarters of the Guyana Police Force's Office of the Professional Responsibility and the Director of Public Prosecutors' Chambers was badly damaged. Mr. Darmlal refused to say how many security personnel had been hired before, instead asking government parliamentarians to check the 2021 national budget. Opposition parliamentarian Lennox Schumann asked the local government minister to justify the need to hire more security guards if the Home Affairs Minister Robeson Ben has said that there has been a reduction in crime.
If your cabinet colleague is saying that crime is on the decrease and it has dropped by over 20%, why are we expending so much more money for security at this juncture if crime is on?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Schumann is asking me a question about a statement of the Minister of Home Affairs. I believe that Mr. Schumann is out of order to ask me a question that the Minister of Home Affairs pronounced on. So I would happily inform Mr. Schumann that if he would like to ask the Honorable Minister of Home Affairs, then you can do so. Insofar as I'm aware, you're out of order to ask me that question.
Local Government Minister Nigel Darmlal. Guyana's Local Content Bill, if passed in its current form, will require oil sector companies to competitively bid for the supply of goods and services. The bill was presented to the National Assembly yesterday by the Natural Resources Minister, Vikram Bharat.
A bill institute an act to provide for the implementation of local content obligations on persons engaged in the petroleum operations or related activities in the petroleum sector. To prioritize Guyanese nationals and Guyanese businesses in the procurement of goods and services for the enhancement of the value chain of the petroleum sector. To enable local capacity development, to provide for the investigation, supervision, coordination, monitoring, and evaluation of and participation in local content in Guyana, to promote competitiveness and encourage the creation of related industries that will sustain the social and economic development of Guyana.
The bill specifies the quota for Guyanese companies and Guyanese individuals. Under the legislation, contractors, subcontractors, and licensees will be required to submit a series of plans as well as yearly updates on progress being made to hire Guyanese individuals and companies. Companies will also have to show that they are training and mentoring experienced Guyanese. The local content bill requires companies to award contracts to companies with the most Guyanese local content if the cost is a 5% difference. At the same time, the Minister of Natural Resources has the power to waive the local content requirements if it is the best interest of Guyana. The Netherlands headquartered SBM Offshore, which is building and operating oil-producing ships to operate in Guyana's waters, says that at least 46% of its workforce is Guyanese. Natural Resources Minister Vikram Bharat is welcoming this move by the company, which has been contracted by ExxonMobil to build the vessels that produce and offload crude oil to exporting tankers. SBM yesterday coincided its 5th anniversary in Guyana with the opening of its headquarters on Sheriff Street, Georgetown. In his remarks, President Irfan Ali said that the local content bill that would be tabled in the National Assembly was not drafted in a vacuum. Police are probing the circumstances surrounding the death of a prisoner at the Betavawagting police station. He was found dead at about 4 hours 35 yesterday afternoon, hours after he was arrested as a suspect in a break-and-enter and larceny. He has been identified as 25-year-old Julian Harrison of LBI East Coast Demerara. Police say he was the only prisoner in the lockups. His body was found hanging by his neck from a metal bar vent by his jersey, which was stripped into long pieces and tied together. And now for the regional news. A number of teachers have been formally dismissed from their job for failure to take a COVID-19 vaccine as mandated, although they received no medical or religious exemptions. The St. Vincent and the Grenadines Teachers Union told Eyewitness News on Thursday that as of Wednesday, 12 teachers had informed the union that they had received dismissal letters. Union President Oswald Robinson also says that a number of unvaccinated teachers had indicated that they had received no salary for December. As part of a law passed by Cabinet, frontline workers, including teachers who had not taken the jab within the specified timeline, were considered as absent without leave, although they turned up to work. Some teachers had been turning up to work despite their unvaccinated status, and Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves had said that they would not be paid. Authorities in St. Vincent and the Grenadines are exploring ways of reducing the cost of fertilizer. As we hear in this report from St. Vincent and the Grenadines TV, the skyrocketing price of fertilizer is due to the global increase in the cost of transportation.
The Ministry of Agriculture has seen significant rise in the price for fertilizers locally over the last 2 years. On NBC Radio's face-to-face program this morning, Minister of Agriculture Saboto Caesar said next year, under the Community Agriculture Program, the ministry will be taking steps to ensure farmers benefit from more reasonable prices.
That a discussion must take place very early in the new year with the traffickers, because the farmers can't take all the burden. If there's an increase in the price of fertilizer, it has to eventually be passed on to the consumer. It has to be passed on to the consumer. And if it's passed on to the consumer, you have to have a fair process whereby the money comes back to the farmer.
Fair enough.
Because, and I'm not saying that this is what will happen, if we ensure that the cost of the goods is now reflective of the increase in the cost of fertilizer, you don't want, when it's coming back down, it's stopped either at the trafficker or some kind of middleman in Trinidad and Tobago or in Barbados. It has to come down to the farmer, and that is one of the big discussions we're going to have when we have the community agriculture programs.
Minister Caesar made it that the increase in the price of fertilizers has nothing to do with any government policy.
Is involved in the movement of goods internationally. A significant rise in the price to move goods, and the movement of the fertilizer and the different products that are used to blend it to make the fertilizer. The price, the cost of transportation has definitely gone up, and because of that, we have witnessed, I think, over $25 increase in the price of fertilizer over the last 2 years.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a major supplier of agricultural produce to Trinidad as well as Barbados and Antigua. Pressure is mounting on Suriname's Vice President, Ronnie Brunswick, to apologize for his bodyguard's assault of a journalist. The Surinamese Journalists Association has announced a boycott of all activities by Mr. Brunswick. They also plan to picket his office as they press for him to apologize to journalist Jason Penis. He was badly beaten outside the National Assembly as he was taking a picture of Mr. Brunswick in his car. Mr. Brunswick has said that Mr. Penis breached security. Mr. Brunswick has asked for a meeting with the Suriname Journalists Association, but that body has refused to do so. Instead, the organization is demanding a public apology first before such talks are held. Several opposition parliamentarians have also heaped criticism on Vice President Brunswick. President Chandrika Prasad Santokhi has since asked the Attorney General to investigate the matter. And now for the international news, the latest bulletin from the BBC World Service.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. A crushing by-election defeat has dealt another blow to the authority of the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. His Conservative Party lost to the Liberal Democrats, a seat it had held for almost 200 years. The result comes in the middle of a turbulent period for Mr Johnson, as Ben Wright explains.
The collapse of the Conservative vote in a once true blue pro-Brexit seat is disastrous for Boris Johnson. The endless headlines about sleaze and parties, held in apparent breach of the government's own rules, drove voters away from the Tories in remarkable numbers. Now, the question is whether Conservative MPs lose confidence in their leader. The readiness of Boris Johnson's parliamentary party to defy his authority was shown this week when half of Conservative backbenchers voted against the government's COVID measures. Just 2 years after winning an 80-seat majority for the Conservatives, some of Mr Johnson's MPs may look at this result and ask if their leader is becoming a liability.
Japanese police believe a fire that's thought to have killed 27 people in a mental health clinic in Osaka could have been started deliberately. Officers are investigating reports that a man was seen carrying a bag with liquid leaking from it. Here's Rupert Wingfield-Hayes.
Dozens of fire engines were at the scene within minutes of the alarm being raised, and the fire was out within half an hour. But those trapped inside apparently had no way to escape and were overcome by toxic fumes. If arson is confirmed, then this fire looks very similar to an attack on an animation studio in Kyoto 2.5 years ago. Then a man with a grudge against the studio poured petrol around the main entrance and set fire to it, killing 36 studio employees and injuring dozens of others.
The United Nations has again warned that all sides in Ethiopia's civil war are committing severe human rights violations. At a meeting of its Human Rights Council, the UN said there was a risk to the entire region and called for all parties to pull back. Ethiopia has dismissed the move as politically motivated. North Korea has urged its people to maintain absolute trust in their leader Kim Jong-un on the 10th anniversary of his rule. Michael Bristow reports.
Exactly 10 years ago, the North Korean leader Kim Jong-il died, bringing to power his son Kim Jong-un. A series of public events have taken place to commemorate the death of the elder Mr. Kim. The country's main newspapers also take the opportunity to call for loyalty to his son. An editorial urged citizens to entrust their fate and their futures to Kim Jong-un's authority. North Korea has changed little under the younger Mr. Kim. The ruling Workers' Party maintains an iron grip on the lives of North Korean people, and relations with the outside world remain tense.
Michael Bristow. World News from the BBC. The Chinese embassy in Afghanistan has warned its nationals not to travel to the country blindly, as it put it, hoping to inspect and acquire mineral resources. Afghanistan has untapped reserves of commodities including gold and rare earths. Chinese companies and individuals have been arriving in Kabul hoping to prospect. People in the Philippines have started returning to their homes to clear up the destruction caused by Typhoon Rai. At one point, the storm brought winds of 195 kilometres an hour. One person is thought to have died. The typhoon has been making its way slowly across the Philippines and is due to hit the western island of Palawan, its ninth landfall in this nation of islands. More than 300,000 people had sought shelter from the storm, which has caused extensive damage. 8 people have died in flooding in the Kurdish-administered region of Iraq. The governor of the capital, Erbil, said most of the victims had been trapped in their homes by a heavy downpour in the early hours of Friday. Searches are being conducted for missing people. Iraq has been hit by a succession of extreme weather events in recent years. Britain and Australia have signed a trade deal to cut import tariffs and loosen work and travel visas for younger people. It's the first trade pact Britain has negotiated from scratch since leaving the European Union. The British government said the deal would boost its bid to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, one of the world's largest free trade areas. Australia's Trade Minister Dan Tehan praised the deal.
For us, and I'm sure it'll be the case for you, the quickest major FTA we have ever negotiated, and to do that through a pandemic is quite extraordinary. So to both our teams, a very hearty congratulations.
And that's the BBC News.
The news came to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories.
A COVID-19 PCR test is now mandatory for many routine activities, including travel and return to work purposes. At Eureka, our trained and experienced staff will ensure confidentiality while your test is conducted in a professional and timely manner, which results in just 48 hours. So the next time you require an efficient and hassle-free PCR COVID-19 test, call 624-8378, 608-8378, or 623-7233 to schedule your appointment. You can also ask about our house call testing service.
To end the news, here's a recap of the leads. Locally, legislation to guarantee Guyanese opportunities to supply goods and services to the oil and gas sector, as well as receive training, was tabled in the National Assembly yesterday. And in regional news, the St. Vincent and the Grenadines government has fired a number of teachers who refused to take a COVID-19 vaccine. And that's the end of the news.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio Newsroom For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.
Giftland Mall, they're giving away vouchers from December 30 to Christmas Eve. You can say there's no such thing as Santa, but as for we on 103, we believe.
From December 13 to 24, listen to News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM.
Answer a simple question and you can win yourself a voucher. Compliments of Giftland Mall.
Season's greetings to supporters of Giftland
and 103.1 FM.